Bonjour, hi. Welcome aboard our Jane's Walk 2020 Life in the Village of Côte Saint-Luc. Good day, and I'm joined by Janine West, our Chief Librarian, who will be leading the tour along with me. My name is Dita Burku, I'm City Councillor in Côte Saint-Luc. Je suis heureuse que malgré la pandémie de COVID-19, la ville de Côte Saint-Luc a réussi quand même à organiser une promenade de Jane virtuelle. Celle-ci est la 4e dans la série de marches qui ont toujours été bilingues, mais cette fois, considérant les circonstances spéciales, nous la ferons en anglais seulement et elle sera traduite en français pour le site web. So, I would like to introduce Janine, who will lead the tour along with me.
Thank you, Dita. Hello, everybody. This year, our main focus will be on the area of Côte Saint-Luc that was hitherto known as the Village, which became the main residential hub of Côte Saint-Luc starting in the 1920s. We will be virtually exploring landmarks, buildings, and houses along streets such as Côte Saint-Luc Road, Westminster, Wolseley, Hudson, Westover, and Wavell. These homes are among the oldest in Côte Saint-Luc and have historical significance.
In its early days, starting in the mid-18th century, Côte Saint-Luc was a predominantly French-speaking farming Catholic community. The first families, including such famous names as the Prud'hommes and the de Carys, were fairly successful landowners and farmers. Right up until the mid-20th century, Côte Saint-Luc remained very agricultural in nature, with a very slow population growth. Specifically from 1820 to 1920, the population only grew from about 200 to 500. But at the beginning of the 20th century, CP Rail bought some farmland, which is now Meadowbrook Golf Course, to become a recreational playground for its employees, leading it to become an attractive residential area. This was a time when new, predominantly Anglophone families were starting to move into the area, and the village was slowly becoming an Anglophone enclave within Côte Saint-Luc. By the mid-1930s into the 40s, it quickly became a tiny, tight-knit community of approximately 40 families who knew each other very well. Many participated in city life as mayor, as councillors, or employees of the city. They lived surrounded by streams, fields, and farms. By 1940, the population had reached about 800. The only streets were Côte Saint-Luc Road, Westminster, Wolseley, that you see on the screen now, Hudson, Smart.
So we are now looking at the 8100 Côte Saint-Luc Road, which is the City of Côte Saint-Luc's Department of Public Safety. The building stands on the site of the Lemieux farm, one of the very first farming families to arrive in Côte Saint-Luc. Pierre Lemieux was the second mayor of Côte Saint-Luc after founding Mayor Luc Prud'homme, and the longest serving mayor. He was mayor from 1905 to 1909 and from 1912 to 1938. He built his house in 1927, and it was sold to the village of Côte Saint-Luc by his son, Leopold Lemieux, in 1946 after his father's death. The house almost immediately became Côte Saint-Luc's first official city hall and was in use until 1964, when City Hall moved to the École P11 building at 594 Westminster, which we will be visiting later on. It then served as the home of the Recreation Department until it became the Department of Public Safety. The Lemieux family had owned the land which had bordered West-Luc and Wolseley. His farm and barn would have been right here on the other side of the City Hall building on Côte Saint-Luc Road. The Lemieux barn, pictured here, was located a little further west between Smart and Wolseley. Here is an image of the Lemieux farm in the 1930s. We can see a horse pulling a sled, and in the background, we see the farmland.
Located right across the street from the City Hall, one sees the house of 8081 and 8083 Côte Saint-Luc Road, which belonged to the Davis family. Aubrey Edgar Davis, born 1909 in Wales, and his brother Ernest George Davis arrived in Canada with their parents, Harriet Ann Jenkins and Aubrey Edward Davis, and their sisters. The house was built in 1946. The brothers shared this house. Aubrey Edgar Davis was a councillor in Côte Saint-Luc from 1949 to 1952, presiding over Seat 5. He was in charge of the Health Committee and was a butcher by profession. On July 21st, 1954, the city of Côte-Saint-Luc named Davis Avenue, previously Fletcher Avenue, after Edgar Davis in homage to his hard work. The adjacent house at 8081 Côte-Saint-Luc Road belonged to his brother Ernest. George Davis and his brother ran a grocery store called Davis Brothers on 58 Westminster in Montreal West, which was where everyone from the village shopped, as there were no stores in Côte-Saint-Luc. Here is an image of the son of George Davis shoveling snow on the west side of his home at 8081 Côte-Saint-Luc Road. And here is another image of George Davis and his son at the corner of Wolseley and Côte-Saint-Luc Road, located on the east side of their home. So you can see the Meadowbrook in the background. You see it's the road towards Meadowbrook. It's very clearly shown on this picture.
Our third stop is at the home of the Kerwin family, who lived right beside the Davies family on the other side of Wolseley Avenue. Isabel Kerwin still lives at 8035, and we had the pleasure of meeting her and her daughter Janice. They shared many stories, including a small memoir written by her son, Jerry Kerwin, entitled The Kerwin Chronicles, which documents life in Côte-Saint-Luc in the 1920s, the 30s, and 40s, as told to him by his father. The Kerwin family moved here from 865 Wolseley, which is today 5651, in the late 1930s. Edward J. Kerwin lived with his wife, Mickey, his son, Gerald, and his wife, Isabel, as well as their 3 daughters. Jerry later moved into 8035, which looks like an addition to the original home. Jerry Kerwin tells a lot about life in Côte-Saint-Luc. Water was provided by wells covered by wooden tops. Only some homes had artesian wells. To obtain water, one needed to pump a wooden handle at the kitchen sink. Paved roads were non-existent. Hudson, Wolseley, and Côte-Saint-Luc Road were all dirt roads. Edward J. Kerwin was first elected to city council in 1923 and served the city for over 40 years, watching it grow from a rural village to a thriving municipality. He served on council from 1923 to 1938, from 1944 to 1955, and from 1959 to 1974. Kerwin received his education at Collège Notre-Dame. The story goes that he was asked to be on city council because he was bilingual. From its origins in 1903, all city council business was done in French. The mayor and the aldermen at the time were French farmers and spoke little or no English. Edward Kerwin, who is on your right, and Gerald Cloutier, who is on the left, founded the Côte-Saint-Luc police force during the early 1930s.
The Nice family had strong ties to Côte-Saint-Luc. James Alfred Nice was born around 1887 in Liverpool, England. He arrived in Montreal aboard the Tunisian in 1908 at 21 years of age. He married Mary Jane Henny in 1912 at the Saint-Philippe Anglican Church in Montreal West. A brick mason by profession, James Alfred Nice built this row house in 1912 at 680 Wolseley. He lived there until his death in 1958. In 1947, James Alfred Jr. built a home at 5505 Smart and lived there until 1961. James worked for the city of Côte-Saint-Luc as the head of public works. James' brothers Harry and Norman also built houses on Smart. Harry and Josephine Nice at 681 Wolseley, and Helen and Norman at 683 Wolseley, and James and Dorothy at 685 Wolseley. And you see these homes are still there today. James' eldest daughter, Diane, lived there until she married in 1958, and Diane had fond memories of growing up in Côte-Saint-Luc, attending Elizabeth Ballantyne School in Montreal West. She would walk to school every day, crossing the bridge over the tracks, which had been constructed in 1938. Norman Nice would later build a house next door to his father's on Wolseley. And in honor of his contribution, James Nice had a street named after him, Nice Street, which is near Fleet Road on the west side of Cavendish between Robinson and North-Luke in my district, District 3.
Down the road on Wolseley lived Ivan Edgar McCubbin. He was born in 1892 in Quebec and married Catherine, or Kate, Annie Hodge in 1916. Ivan McCubbin was a carpenter by profession. He built his house located at 635 Wolseley in 1927. As we see here, his house still stands today. He became councillor at the municipality from 1936 to 1941. He was in charge of fire protection and was influential in the creation of a system of fire protection. He was then put in charge of the buildings department. In honor of his contributions, the city named a street after him nearby.
Westover Road was actually built over a tributary of the old St. Pierre River, which was one of more than 30 rivers and streams that once traversed the island of Montreal. It traveled from its source on Mount Royal via several tributaries to Côte Saint-Luc, Ville-Saint-Pierre, Saint-Henri, and Verdun, all the way to Pointe-à-Calière in Old Montreal and Agrignon Park in La Salle. Settlements grew up around the streams, and country roads like Côte de Neige and Côte Saint-Luc Road traced its contours. Alongside Côte Saint-Luc Road and into the Meadowbrook Golf Course, you can see part of the St. Pierre River, which ran there. It is the only stretch of the river that is still visible today on the Meadowbrook Golf Course. By 1961, most of the streams in Côte Saint-Luc were buried. And in the winter months, the St. Pierre River would freeze, and many Côte Saint-Lucers would take the opportunity to go out and skate, as is visible on this image provided to us by Bob Dallison, whose family lived right around the corner.
Leonard Dallison grew up first at 774 Hudson and then 835 Wolseley Avenue, which we will be visiting soon. When he got married to Olga Schoenberg, he moved to the house located here at 600 Westminster. Today, his house is barely recognizable due to extensive renovations. Leonard and Olga went on to have 3 children, Robert, known as Bob, Jean, and Frank. Bob Dallison met with us and provided a great deal of information about growing up in Côte Saint-Luc during the 40s and 50s. Here is another image provided to us by Leonard Dallison's son, Bob Dallison. The St. Pierre River, which was called the Creek, circled the flat on both sides. They had a wooden shed and a driveway located between the flat near the river. Almost opposite to the flat's entrance is the entrance to the Prudhomme Farms. There was a complex of farm buildings and a stone farmhouse. These were far from the street with the hayfields in between. There was also an entrance to the farm off Côte Saint-Luc Road.
I see ducks there on the river. Little ducks, yeah.
Around 1959, a fire demolished the 200-year-old farm, which belonged to Jérémy Prudhomme, who had brought the property from Firmin Desjardins. Juveniles may have been responsible for starting the fire. City Works Superintendent J.A. Nice could see the fire from his window from Smart Avenue. The farms, built by Côte Saint-Luc pioneers around 1750, were built along the St. Pierre River, which served as transportation in those times. Jérémy Prudhomme, owner of this farm for 60 years, had died several years before the burning. His 13 sons sold off the property to the Berman Company.
So this stucco house at 618 Westminster with 2 rental apartments belonged to Edward Prudhomme, son of Jeremy Prudhomme, and his family, who lived there after their farmhouse was sold and demolished following the big fire. His farmland has now become an apartment building, and this house is still there today right next to the shopping center.
Moving up Westminster, the location of the B'nai B'rith used to be a French Catholic school. Its old address was 674 Westminster. It's now 8000 Côte Saint-Luc Road. It was the only school in Côte Saint-Luc and served the children of the farmers. As English-speaking families came into the area, they had to send their children to schools in Montreal West, such as Elizabeth Ballantyne Elementary and Montreal West High School, which is now Royal West. The school was often used for Sunday Mass and council meetings in the 30s and 40s after the Sulpician Church at the corner of King Edward and Côte Saint-Luc Road was sold. The city of Côte Saint-Luc moved there permanently from 8100 Côte Saint-Luc Road, which was the former home of Pierre Lemieux, in 1964. At that time, the property was owned by the Ivanhoe Corp, and the city rented it for $18,000 a year. To the side of the entrance of this new city hall, a big cross was built in honor of a holy year.
Across the street from the school on the northwest corner of Côte Saint-Luc Road, where we now have the TD Bank, once stood the famous Gallardo's, which served hamburgers, hot dogs, and fries. Gallardo's was one of the very few restaurants in Côte Saint-Luc at the time. Diane Nice Morgan worked there as a waitress in the 50s, and I can say that I went there as a teenager in the 60s. And taken in 1937, this image shows us the northeast corner of Côte Saint-Luc Road in Westminster. The Prudhomme Farms, as mentioned at stop 7, would have been at the southeast corner. The CPR tracks are visible in the background, as well as an old-style Bell telephone cable traversing the photo. This photo of all the village families was taken in the open fields at the northeast corner of Westminster and Côte Saint-Luc Road on June 18th, 1937.
The duplex at 719 and 721 Hudson Avenue, the current address is 5509 and 5511, was built in 1925. Frederick David Lamont, the fourth mayor of Côte Saint-Luc, lived here with his wife, his mother, and his sister. He was born in 1893 at the Stanley Street Presbyterian Church in Montreal. He married Edith Norval May Mackenzies in 1928 at the same church. Throughout his life, Lamont worked as a secretary and treasurer for various mining companies, as well as being manager for investment firms. Fred Lamont was a city councillor from 1929 to 1937. He served as chairman of the finance committee. He got elected as mayor in 1938 for a one-year period. He resigned on March 7, 1939, and was followed by Mayor Donald Fletcher. Lamont passed away in 1969 at the age of 76 in Pinellas, Florida.
The Westminster Extension. Before the 1950s, Westminster stopped at Côte Saint-Luc Road. Beyond Côte Saint-Luc Road, there was just farmland. The railroad crossing was actually one street over to the west on Hudson. On September 23, 1947, the city of Côte Saint-Luc and the Canadian Pacific Railway reached an understanding that would permit the extension of Westminster. An agreement was signed in 1951, and the extension was completed by the CPR company that included a level crossing. The Hudson crossing was closed off. As development of the area increased, traffic delays at the crossing became intolerable. At first, the idea was a level crossing with the eventual construction of a bridge over the tracks. However, a decision was made to construct an underpass rather than a bridge, and this was done on June 22nd, 1959. Many residents of the area, such as Monsieur Bergeron of Wolseley Avenue, complained about the hardships encountered by the closing of the Hudson Avenue level crossing. Unfortunately, the Board of Transport Commissioners informed that the request for a foot passage at Hudson could not be granted. And we are very well aware of these constant refusals by CP to allow us to do the level crossings for pedestrian traffic. Another complaint came from Mr. Donald Fletcher, past mayor of Côte Saint-Luc, who spoke about the inconvenience caused by Wavell Street not being opened. He mentioned that the fare in a taxi was $1.50 above the regular rate by having to go via Guelph Street.
Walking under the railroad tracks from Westminster through this small foot passage, we reach Wavell Road, which used to be called Depression Lane before it was renamed in 1950. We're not sure why, but a theory is that this street, which is adjacent to the railway tracks, was geologically speaking a depression. It was not a formal street, whether it was a lane or a walkway. The street was renamed after Sir Archibald Wavell, who was a British intellectual, diplomat, and military leader.
Now we know where our names come from. Born in 1873 in Dunvegan, Ontario, Donald Fletcher came to Quebec at a very young age. He was living at 241 Wolseley Avenue in Montreal West from around 1915 to 1922. In 1922, he moved to 804 Wolseley Avenue in Côte Saint-Luc, which became 5618 Wolseley in the 50s. The house he lived in was built in 1914. Previously, there was another house on this land that was built in 1886. Apparently, there was a beautiful rose garden next door tended by Mrs. Fletcher. Councillor Fletcher became Mayor Fletcher. Don Fletcher served as alderman for 10 years, from 1929 to 1939, and was elected mayor in 1939 until 1951. An engineer by profession, he had a keen interest in building bylaws and the inspection of buildings. He passed away in 1962 at 88 years of age.
The home at 865 Wolseley, today 5651, was built in 1915. It was purchased at some time by William J. Henderson, who may have lived in it, but who was later recorded as living at 856 Wolseley. This was a home that he rented out, probably first to Edward J. Kerwin in the 1920s and 30s. Ed Kerwin, as we previously saw, left around 1935 or 36 to live in the house he built on Côte Saint-Luc Road. The house was then rented to William Dallison and his family, a good friend and golfing buddy of the Hendersons. When Henderson died, an opportunity arose for his son-in-law, John Henderson, to purchase it. John and his wife, Gertrude Alice Henderson, raised their family of 6 children there. It finally became the home of the Van Egmond family, the owners of the Edgewood Nursery, located right beside the home. The Edgewood Nurseries had their entrance on Hudson, 5640, but spanned the whole area between Hudson and Wolseley. You can see the home, 5651, in the background.
Right around the corner, we have the old entrance to the Edgewood Nurseries. Edgewood Florist and the Van Egmond family were part of the Côte Saint-Luc landscape for more years than most residents of this city. Established here in 1956, they played a special role in the lives of thousands of our residents over the decades, making milestone events all the more special with their beautiful floral arrangements. Due to business pressures, the nursery relocated to Montreal West in 2012 and was built over by these new townhouses. Dirk Van Egmond immigrated from Holland in the 1950s and bought the home and nurseries from Mr. Sarrazin with his former partner Henk Broekhuizen in 1956. Both men had experience with flowers. Dirk's family grew tulip bulbs in Holland. Moving to Quebec, he got work at a nursery in Saint-Luc. They used to supply fresh flowers to a number of flower shops in Montreal once a week. They would deliver floral arrangements to the Empress passenger steamships that docked on Montreal. Some residents used to ride along on the deliveries. Brian Henderson, who lived at 865, used to drive the van.
The Allen family lived at 807, 809 Hudson. Today, which is 5615 and 5619. Horace Allen and his wife Emily Charge were at 809, and his son Sidney James and his wife were at 807. As we can see, the old house built in 1924 still stands today. Sidney James Allen was born in 1891 in England. He came to Montreal in 1910 at the age of 19, settling down in the village of Côte Saint-Luc. He got married to Edith Annie Coswell in 1916 at the Baptist Temple in Montreal. A florist by profession, he lived with his wife and his son Sidney Allen Jr. at 807 Hudson. Sidney Allen was appointed municipal councillor in Côte Saint-Luc in 1939. He was put in charge of the Department of Parks and Playgrounds. He stayed on council until 1941 and was elected again in 1943. Mr. Allen passed away in 1987 at the age of 96 and was buried at the Mount Royal Cemetery. The Allen family ran a greenhouse, which is the bottom right of the map, located at the corner of Hudson and the CPR railroad tracks, right near their home. It was operated by Sidney Allen.
Our last stop is the first home of William Dallison, located right across from the Allen Greenhouse at 774 Hudson, now 5606 Hudson. The house was built in 1920. He lived there with his wife and sons Leonard and Gilbert in the 1920s and 30s. As we saw previously, Leonard eventually bought his own home at 600 Westminster in the 40s or 50s. Here is a portrait of William Dallison. Well, that's the end of our tour. And I'm just going to make some closing remarks. By the 1950s, Côte Saint-Luc had experienced a population boom. Developers bought up many of the farms, subdivided the land, began building homes, and attracting many young English-speaking families to the area. By 1951, the population reached 1,000 and the city became a town. The town became a city in 1958, and by 1961, there were 13,000 inhabitants. The small, predominantly French-speaking Catholic farming community that had changed little in 200 years had now disappeared. So I would like to thank Janine and the library staff for the wonderful, wonderful virtual tour that they have prepared. And I look forward to doing this again, either in person or virtually, but it's been a most instructive and beautiful experience. And I hope that our residents and all those who are watching have enjoyed it. Thank you, Janine.
And I would like to thank some special people who have helped us construct this fascinating story of life in the village of Côte. First, Councillor Dita Burku for her enthusiasm and support. Librarian Taline Aktorosian, who was my partner in both research and putting this story together. Bob Dallison, the grandson of one of the first original residents. Mrs. Diane Nice Morgan, the granddaughter of another Côte Saint-Luc first resident. And finally, Mrs. Isabel Kerwin, the daughter-in-law of Edward J. Kerwin. Without their personal insight into what it was like to grow up here during the 20s, 30s, and 40s, our tour would have simply been about known facts and dates. They have provided us with inspiring and memorable stories far beyond what is recorded here. We will be forever grateful.